Right here I've got three big beefy budget 15-inch subwoofers. You can get any of these subwoofers right now on Amazon for less than 150 bucks. Up first is the brand everyone loves to hate, Scar Audio. It's an 800 watt RMS subwoofer with a 2.5-inch voice coil. And it's really similar to the other subwoofers right here in front of you. They've all got a paper cone, they've all got stitched foam surrounds, they've all got a pole vent on the back as well as perimeter venting.
Correction, the H-Yanka does not have perimeter vents.
They've all got push terminals, they're all dual voice coils, they've all got woven tinsel leads. The big differences in the drivers are going to be the frames. The Scar has a stamped frame. This right here is what I've been calling the Scar killer for the past year and a half. We're going to find out in this video because we're going to put them head to head. This is the H-Yanka. The big difference between the Scar and the H-Yanka, at least visually, is the basket. And other than having a slightly larger voice coil coming in at 2.6 inches, there's no real material difference between the H-Yanka and the Scar. H-Yanka does rate this subwoofer for 1,000 watts, so in theory it should be able to handle more power than the Scar. Moving on to this one over here, I've never tried this brand out before. This is the Wildsey. The Wild Side? I don't know. Once again, very similar subwoofer. The big difference being this frame, the basket. And the other cool thing on this one, it actually has a double spider. One thing you can't see, this one's got a 3-inch voice coil. Looking a little bit closer, I see another feature that the Wildsey and the H-Yanka have that the Scar does not have. They've got a mechanical clamp that's going to hold the spider in place. It's probably glued in as well. You know, when I peek in through the venting, you can definitely tell that the voice coil is much larger on the Wildsey.
Before I do any testing, here is an initial ranking of these three subwoofers. First place is the Wildsey. It has a beefy cast basket, a much bigger voice coil, and that double spider. I'm going to put the H-Yanka slightly ahead of the Scar. The H-Yanka has a better basket and the Scar has a slightly larger voice coil, but the Scar is the most expensive subwoofer of the three, which puts it in last place in a budget sub shootout. And while we're talking about Scar, let me say I love testing Scar products because of the reaction that I get from you. If I say anything positive about the brand, someone's going to jump in the comments and call me a paid shill for Scar. And if I say anything negative at the brand, people are going to jump in the comments and tell me I'm a Scar hater and part of some vast anti-Scar conspiracy. And the Scar fans always jump in and say I should check out the DDX and EVL. Well, both of those subwoofers are considerably more expensive than the one we're testing here, so they don't count. This is the budget shootout. As far as the testing goes, there are several things we're going to do here. I'm going to do a few sweeps in Room EQ Wizard to see if there are any major differences in the frequency response. I'll be showing those later in the video, so keep watching. You don't want to miss that. Then I'm going to take each subwoofer and run it up to their rated power and hold it there for a few seconds before bumping up the power to see if the subwoofers can take light abuse. All three subwoofers are going into a down for sound 15-inch subwoofer enclosure that I built in this video right up here, and I'll be using a JP23 amp. Two really important things. I've got the gain dialed back so that I'm in no danger of clipping the subs. I want to make sure they're getting clean power. I'll be running a 40 Hz test tone for all the tests, which is well above the box tuning frequency, so there should be no worry about the subwoofers bottoming out. That's going to eliminate two common sources of failure, so if they do fail, then it's 100% due to the subwoofer and not any abuse. The test itself is going to be a little longer than just your normal kind of burp. I'm going to be looking for a prolonged burst. First up is the Scar. Okay, there you go. Feel free to rewind and verify. I ran this subwoofer up to 800 watts and left the volume knob alone for about 18 seconds. We started losing power as the voltage started to sag. You may have noticed in the video, we got down to 12.7 volts. The SPL meter is in peak hold mode and it showed a peak SPL of 132.5 D. And the Scar had no problem whatsoever holding steady at its rated power for a few seconds. Remember, this is a 40 Hz test tone, which is not music. It's a constant sine wave and it's actually hard on the equipment. Now let's give it some more juice and see what happens. rewind the video if you want to see for yourself. This time I ran it up to about 1244 watts and I let it ride. Again, the voltage starts to drop and the impedance climbed as the coil started to heat up, and I pulled the plug as it was dropping below 900 watts. I just so happened to have the doors open this time, so the SPL reading with the doors open was 134.9. Up next is the H-Yanka, and while I'm setting up the test, I need to talk about this video here that my buddy Parker filmed. In that video, Parker smoked the sub on 800 watts, but that test was in free air and it was performed after several high power bursts. So even though he cautioned against buying this subwoofer, in his video he was absolutely abusing the subwoofer. That's not my intention. I don't have the battery reserves to run 800 watts for a minute and a half like he did, and the reality is most of you don't either, so it's really unlikely that you would cause the sub to fail in the same epic way that he did. At one point the specs on Amazon said this was a 1200 watt sub. Currently the specs say this is a 1000 watt sub, so we're going to hold it at 1000 watts for a prolonged burst and see what happens. There you go. Feel free to rewind and look again. I inadvertently ran it up past its peak and cranked it up to about 1500 watts for a second before I backed it down a bit, and I held it right around 1000 watts for a good solid 12 seconds until the DD1 timed out on me. So this subwoofer spent a good solid 15 seconds at or above its rated power. I got a peak SPL on the dash of 135.7 dB. Resetting the DD1, this time it peaked at just over 1300 watts and we got a 136.1. And just for the fun of it, let's give it a few seconds of full tilt. So there you go, well over 1500 watts, almost up to 1600 watts. Holding those levels of power for 15 or so seconds. With reasonable use on clean power, this subwoofer should do just fine. Now I'm really excited about the Wild C with that big 3-inch voice coil. While I'm swapping out these subs, I want to take a second to say thank you to all of my patrons over on Patreon. In addition to behind the scenes exclusives, $10 patrons get their name in the video right down here, and 25 and up patrons like Jonathan, Joaquin, JD America, God King Toro, Timothy, and Bo get a great big shout out in the video. Thank you guys, I appreciate your support. If you like what I'm doing here on YouTube, the best way to support me is click right up here and join these guys over on Patreon. All right, we got 134. So just like before, I'm slowly cranking up the power. And this time I held it at rated power for about 6 seconds, and we got 134.2 dB. Let's give it some more power and see what happens. So in that test, we peaked at over 1500 watts. We held it there for 20 seconds and we hit 137 dB. And for those who want to see them again, here are the SPL numbers. The first column is the valid data. That is close to or at the RMS rating for the subwoofer. You really shouldn't pay attention to the other numbers. Those are there more for entertainment, and there is a bias in those results. Both the Yanka and the Wild C were dual 2-ohm subwoofers wired to a nominal load of 1 ohm, but this particular SCAR was a dual 4-ohm, so it was wired to a nominal load of 2 ohms. You can go back through the test and see that the SCAR was playing at a higher impedance, meaning it wasn't able to draw as much power, so those peak SPL numbers are not valid. These tests do conclusively show is that all of these subwoofers can handle sustained bursts at well over rated power. You could take any of these and hook them up to an 800 to 1000 watt RMS amp, and as long as you're not clipping, bottoming out the subs, or otherwise abusing the subs, there's no reason to expect that any of these would fail under normal usage. Which one would I pick? Well, first, let's take a look at some sweeps in Room EQ Wizard. So for the measurements, I use this guy right here. This is the Dayton Audio IMM6C. What makes this different? It has a USB-C connector on this end, so you can plug it into anything with USB-C. A lot of phones these days don't come with headphone jacks, and so if you want to use an RTA on your phone, this is what you need right here. And of course, a lot of computers have USB-C slots. I just plugged this to a USB extension cable and then mounted this right at the passenger side headrest and ran a few sweeps in Room EQ Wizard. Up here on the screen, I've got the results of one of those sweeps. And the first thing I want to point out, it is downward sloping between 100 hertz down to 20 hertz, which is kind of a weird response curve. All of the measurements I've taken in my vehicle, both with this microphone and with different microphones, have given me the same characteristic response. Any number of things could have caused this. The amplifier is a JP23. It has an infrasonic filter. I set it at the lowest setting, which is 10 hertz. And so this little dip right here at the very bottom might be the result of that infrasonic filter. It's also possible, since I was using the headphone output on my laptop computer, that this result right here could be due to a roll-off built into the computer to keep from blowing out your headphones. Or it could just be that my truck kills off all the bass at the passenger headrest. Any of those three things could cause this, but it's still a valid measurement because I'm measuring all of the subwoofers the exact same way. So it's an unbiased comparison between the subwoofers. So let's add in another subwoofer. Let's add the Yanka, which I have been calling the SCAR Killer. And as you can see, the blue line, which is the Yanka, is above the red line, which is the SCAR, thus telling us that the SCAR appears to be inferior to the Yanka, but hang on a second, there's something else I want to show you. Before I show you that, let's add the Wild Z to the screen. So the Wild Z is the green line, and what you're going to notice is that the Wild Z doesn't play as loud in these upper frequencies, up near where your low pass filter is going to be. And then that green line passes the other two and just kind of runs right along the Yanka through a large chunk of this range, slightly above the SCAR. So it looks like the SCAR is the inferior driver of the three, but there may be a reason for that. I mentioned earlier in the video, I'm not sure if you caught it, the SCAR I'm using is a dual 4-ohm, not a dual 2-ohm like the other two subwoofers. We can easily correct for that. Going from 2 ohms to 1 ohm in theory doubles your power, and doubling power in theory will increase your output by 3 dB. So to give the SCAR the benefit of the doubt, I modified the file by adding 3. So what I'm going to do is delete the original SCAR measurement, so we just have the Wild C and the Yanka, and you can see here that below 60 hertz, it's really too close to call. So when we add the SCAR that's been adjusted to account for the difference in impedance, here's what we get. So the black line is the SCAR, and as you can see, if we give the SCAR the benefit of the doubt, it tracks right along the other two subwoofers. So given all this information, which one do I call the winner? Well, one thing you need to consider is the price, and at the time of filming, the SCAR was actually the most expensive of these three subwoofers. And since this is a budget subwoofer shootout, that automatically has to knock the SCAR down just a little bit of a notch. So the winner has to be between the Yanka and the Wild C, and clearly the Wild C is the winner. And if you like cheap subwoofers, check out this video right here. Click right here to subscribe.
I'm Justin, this is the DIY Audio Guy YouTube channel, and I will see you on the next adventure.